And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Danielle Butsick. She is um, a senior environmental program manager with the Port of Seattle, and she'll be telling us about the AdaptSea Port of Seattle partnership, um, the Resilience Partnership, creating space for collaborative adaptation. So, with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to her, and might take a moment to get her slides pulled up. So, bear with us.
Did you guys receive them in email?
I just did. Let me pull.
Cool. Well, I can go ahead and get started while you guys are transitioning. It's just my title slide up first. I'm really excited to share with you all about this partnership. It's been 3 years in the making. We're on our fourth year, just starting. And I always have to start presentations about AdaptSea with the caveat that it's not a sea level rise adaptation strategy. I think that sometimes, at least internally, we at the port kind of some people think that it's a little bit more than it is maybe, but it's a partnering framework. It's really a way for us to get together and have conversations about our future goals in adaptation and think about ways that we can work together towards sea level rise adaptation and more strategically, I guess, align our adaptation approaches and think about appropriate sequencing and how we might be able to amplify the effect of the strategies that we implement by working together. I have to constantly remind myself that if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, take a friend. So we're really trying to just make this a really strong partnership and a forum for us to share information with one another about our adaptation work. So you can go to the next slide. AdaptSea started with the Port of Seattle sort of recognizing the need to coordinate with with the City of Seattle and other waterfront partners, specifically public agencies that either regulate or manage infrastructure on the waterfront. So we put in a request to our Environment and Sustainability Department, our Center of Expertise for Environment and Sustainability in 2023, and asked for funding for 3 years to put together a working group to really start talking about and discussing our collective strategy to address potential flooding from sea level rise. And at the time, we were coordinating with the City of Seattle over some new floodplain regulations that they had just passed, and just trying to figure out how we could balance sea level rise adaptation goals with the potential impacts to port operations that could result from some of those code changes. So we really want to create a path at the port. We really want to create a path to improved resilience, but because our infrastructure is so large and unique, it was kind of uniquely impacted by the new codes that the City of Seattle had passed. And in a lot of cases, we found that full code compliance was really cost prohibitive, and it was going to prevent us from doing the projects altogether. So our only choice in that scenario would have been to pursue a variance from the code, which would waive the requirements, and then we wouldn't even be incrementally working toward that adaptation, which is not an ideal scenario for anyone. We really want to move toward resilience and adaptation, and we want to be able to comply with code. And so it just really felt like we needed to have some conversations with the city about how we best do that. So we saw an opportunity to just better align toward better outcomes for the public. I mean, we're both public entities. We have objectives that we are, we're beholden to taxpayers to deliver on. So we really wanted to get together and see how we could better steward our infrastructure and comply with codes in a reasonable way that would allow us to continue our operations. So we wanted to put together a document at the end of the process, which pulled together existing studies from our partners and looked at, what research had already been done, and kind of get a baseline understanding of the state of the science, what resources are out there, um, and also potentially look at other environmental risks that could be exacerbated by climate change and sea level rise. We also wanted to do some flood modeling and see what assets were potentially exposed to sea level rise. So we pulled together some GIS data from our own assets at the port, as well as the assets that some of our partners had GIS files for, to show where they were at risk, where those assets were at risk. Of course, we didn't really look at vulnerability, so we didn't do like a full sensitivity and adaptive capacity analysis, just really looked at exposure. And then we wanted to pull together a report that included recommendations for future coordinated efforts. So this is kind of where the Port of Seattle was coming to this from. So we wanted to pull together existing research. We wanted to think about how to focus our adaptation measures on not just our own waterfront infrastructure, but also the infrastructure that supports it. So like public infrastructure that the city of Seattle manages in King County. And then importantly, talk about how we plan for investments in adaptation together. You can go to the next slide now. So for the Port of Seattle, I'm just going to talk from my perspective what assets we were focusing on, but there are of course a lot of other assets that our partners wanted to focus on too. These are kind of the key assets that the Port of Seattle has that could be at risk from sea level rise, and that are also subject to the new codes that the city had passed related to floodplain codes. So we have a lot of overwater structures. So our piers and wharves and cargo terminals are really important, major public infrastructure. We also are really dependent on the roads that the city maintains that serve our port facilities, including for shipping out of our cargo terminals, freight and trucking, as well as cruise provisioning and access through the public realm to our properties. We actually have our own utility, a stormwater utility, that we manage our own infrastructure, but we also are reliant on the city's stormwater infrastructure, as well as water and electricity. Those feed into our port properties. So those are pretty important for us to make sure that they're resilient. We also have habitat restoration and mitigation sites. Those are major assets for us. We have a mitigation banking program through which we generate habitat credits, and we sell those as actually a revenue making business line. And so maintaining our habitat sites and making sure that they are not negatively affected by flooding and sea level rise is super important to us. We also have, as some of you may know, we have a lot of public access sites that we've built over the years as we develop our properties, and those are potentially at risk too. So these are the types of assets that we're really focusing on, and of course you can see like there's a lot of connection between our assets and other public assets as well. You can go to the next slide now. So one of the benefits of the partnership is really just bringing together City of Seattle departments who are focused on different, um, different types of infrastructure and different planning initiatives. It was really cool to just to see all of them kind of come together and start thinking about these issues collectively. And I know they've got like some internal coordination groups too, but this is a list of the City of Seattle agencies and departments that came together to work with us in AdaptSea. We also worked with the King County Wastewater Treatment Division staff, folks from WashDOT and Washington State Ferries. They have obviously infrastructure on the waterfront as well, and the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is a partnership between the City of Seattle or the Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma that manages our cargo facilities. So they're a pretty key player as well. And you can see from this map, this is kind of our like general area of focus. Basically the marine waters of Seattle, or the marine shorelines of Seattle, including the Duwamish River up to, I think we said about River Mile 4 or so, which is about South Park, where the Port of Seattle has our Duwamish River Peoples Park habitat site. These folks were really engaged throughout the last 3 years, but we also have engaged what we call advisors at key points and key discussions throughout the conversation, or throughout the last 3 years, just to either like advise or to like consult with them on specific topics or specific geographies that are particularly important to them. A key contributor to some of those discussions was the Department of Ecology. They have a pretty strong role in designing and implementing and monitoring remediation projects on the Seattle waterfront. And so, and particularly in the Duwamish, but throughout. So we really engaged with them quite a bit. Because there is like, I think we kind of saw a connection between different types of projects and opportunities to tap into kind of the energy behind something like a remediation project or a public access project or something that may not have had a specific sea level rise adaptation focus, but we could sort of like add sea level rise adaptation as kind of a co-benefit. So we also spoke a lot with the UW Climate Impacts Group. We had Dr. Ian Miller came and spoke with us a bit, and Washington Sea Grant, of course, and the Duwamish River Community Coalition was also one of our advisors that we pulled in to really help us understand what the community's priorities were and what kind of planning initiatives were happening already in the Duwamish when we talked about that. And I'll talk about kind of our focus area model in a little bit. You can go to the next slide. So we did adopt a charter. It was early on, we had intended to kind of use an MOA or a memorandum of agreement or an interlocal agreement to formalize the partnership and create a structure where all partners were sort of like contributing some like monetary level and had a commitment of staff time to some degree. But it really became clear at the beginning that we really just needed to create a meaningful forum, and that could happen maybe even more easily at a more voluntary staff level, rather than a formal like ILA level. So we ended up just adopting this charter with these kind of four main goals. And just worked at a voluntary level, just staff level at this point. And I think that there's room for maybe formalizing in the future, but And that would probably happen if there were like external funding on the table. If we were to get a grant or some sort of funding for the work, we may be able to revisit that idea of a formal agreement. But we wanted to just spend the time that we had, which felt really limited, just getting more substantive and just having these deep conversations. So yeah, we moved forward with just a verbal agreement on a charter. We really wanted to compile and share any strategies that we were moving toward as individual organizations and whatever tools we had access to or had developed. It was important to us to coordinate and think about the projects that we had coming up or that we saw a need for, and make sure that we were thinking about the phasing of those, how they would work together in sequence, given that all of our infrastructure on the waterfront is so connected and interdependent. Part of that would be engaging on our capital planning processes so that we have some visibility for each of the partners on what's coming down the pike, what do we see in our capital plans coming up. And then, of course, following on that, seeing what projects we have, what our capital plans look like, we might be able to have some anticipate opportunities for grant funds that we could apply for if some of those capital projects overlap and there's a potential for like co-benefits, we might be able to anticipate that and apply for grant funding to help support those projects. You can move to the next slide now. So we wanted to learn from others who were doing similar work in this sphere. And, because we knew this couldn't be the first and only time that local governments had gotten together to plan together on sea level rise. So we just pulled a couple of case studies together and had some of these folks come and present to our group and just talk about their experience putting together a partnership similar to this. We drew from the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County first. They have actually established a special purpose district to work specifically on resilience infrastructure projects. And some of you may be familiar with them. I think there were some presentations in some forums that some of you may participate in. Maybe a couple of years ago, we talked with these folks about their experience. We kind of relied on this as we were initially thinking that there could be some sort of special district on the waterfront that we could could actually like design and implement infrastructure projects that are related to sea level rise resilience. With Annapolis and Arundel County Resilience Authority, they have the ability to issue bonds, but they don't have taxation authority. So that I think that there's some challenge there the finances are always like the challenge. And I also know we did some preliminary research that in Washington State there are some significant limitations to how special districts are established and what their purpose can be. And so we haven't spent a lot of time following this path, but it was still really interesting and informative to learn about what other areas are doing. What we really learned a lot from the Port of Olympia and City of Olympia lot partnership. A lot of you are probably familiar with that. They've actually developed a joint sea level rise response plan. And for those of you who don't know, LOT is the Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, and Thurston wastewater management district. So they together are those counties and cities partner on wastewater management through the LOT organization. They've together prepared this sea level rise response plan that has that's really been, I think, an example of a successful partnership. They have a formal interlocal agreement. They fund a staff person, and they were able to actually come and present to our group and share their lessons learned. So we learned a lot from them, and I think that there's a lot of interest in among the AdaptSea partners in modeling our partnership after the City of Olympia and Port of Olympia and Lot partnership. We also spoke to another West Coast port, city and port of San Francisco. They've got some really cool climate initiatives where they've really combined their climate and sea level rise planning with their capital and infrastructure planning, and have really made they've got like kind of one unified office for resilience and capital planning, which I think it goes a long way in really integrating resilience into everything that they do, rather than like, making it kind of an afterthought, which sometimes it feels like that can be a challenge with adaptation planning. They have done some really in-depth work on vulnerability assessment, and they've worked with the Corps of Engineers on an in-depth feasibility study, which is basically a vulnerability assessment and identification of projects. They've got like $13 billion in flood risk reduction projects identified through this feasibility study that they completed with the Corps. And I would love for us to be able to undertake that kind of work as well. So these are the folks that, oh, you can go to the next one. We also talked a little bit about groundwater as as a potential risk related to sea level rise. A lot of people think about surface flooding, but groundwater is a real issue too, especially when we have this, the Puget Sound used to be an estuary and it was filled in, and so we've got like all this liquefiable soils and sediments that could potentially be at risk from groundwater. So that was another thing that we shared in the group. We wanted to ground ourselves in this best available science on groundwater. And I do want to note here that this is so the Cosmos groundwater model currently combines global climate models, and it kind of like includes regional like wave and tide data and stuff. But it's a pretty generalized model, so it doesn't take into account a lot of the local hydrogeology. And so King County is actually going to be working on a groundwater model with USGS, and they've started doing the modeling for the Duwamish area, actually the area that you're seeing here on this map. And the Port of Seattle has actually funded expanding the study area to the central waterfront all the way up to the Ship Canal. So that's going to be a more detailed local groundwater model with some capability to project what groundwater levels might be with various scenarios of sea level rise. So that's really exciting and coming. But getting back to AdaptSea, we did have some conversations just about groundwater, just as a potential component for us to include in our discussions of adaptation. You can go to the next slide. So I mentioned at the top, we use kind of a focus area model where we 4 specific areas along the waterfront, not contiguous, and just kind of like loosely drew some boundaries so that we could just kind of like focus in on the kind of infrastructure that was present in those areas, and asked the partners to each take a look at their like capital plans and any initiatives that they had ongoing to see if they are working on anything related to climate change or sea level rise adaptation or seismic resilience or other sorts of environmental hazards. Talk about any upcoming projects or needs that they had identified for longer term investments. And then we came together at each of these quarterly meetings to discuss what the potential was for like design or sequencing conflicts, or if there were opportunities for us to potentially work together on projects that like multiple entities were pursuing projects on, or geographies that we were all pursuing projects on. So in a lot of cases, there are a lot of different interests that are converging on one site. And that was, kind of the theme of this whole initiative, is we've really kind of seen that different sites, a lot of sites along the Seattle waterfront are multi-layered, and there's, we've got people who are interested in, ecology and salmon recovery and environmental justice and community access to the river, and then sea level rise and remediation, and like all of these different things sort of coincide in these same geographies. And so the focus area model enabled us to kind of look at what all of those different activities and interests were that were happening in these kind of like confined geographic areas. Yeah, I can go to the next slide now. So as we were having these conversations about our, each individual entity's planning initiatives, we also sort of in parallel were doing some dynamic wave modeling similar to what you see in Cosmos. This didn't include riverine flow characteristics. It was really just coastal and wave modeling. We modeled based on a kind of a near-term sea level rise scenario of 2 feet and a long-term sea level rise scenario of 5 feet, with and then coupled those with the 10-year and 100-year storm scenarios for wind-driven waves. And for each of the focus areas, as well as actually the whole Seattle waterfront, we've modeled inundation zones, and they will be live this month. So we've included them in an Esri StroyMap, and I was really hoping that by this presentation I would be able to share the live link to our StroyMap, but it is still to come. But very soon it will be available online. And I can send that to you, Ellen and Chandler, if you want to send that out to folks when we've got it. But it's actually it is similar to the Cosmos modeling, but I think it's a really great opportunity for comparison and validating with Cosmos, and just seeing if there are areas that are like profoundly different. Like we can see maybe like why is that showing up different? Is there some opportunity for like a deeper analysis? As with all models, it's like all models are wrong, but they're wrong in different ways. So it'll be interesting to see like which areas really might be at higher risk and areas that might just need like a little bit more study. Next slide. So we compiled all of these conversations that we had over the last 3 years into a final recommendations report, which will also be available on the website when that goes live. And I grabbed a few of the kind of like my favorite, I guess, recommendations that came out of the report. One of them is to perform habitat modeling to really look at how our habitat sites might be affected by sea level rise and help actually inform future design, to see how we can like make sure that our habitat zones can evolve as sea level rises. Support research into the effects of sea level rise on groundwater. And that's, as I mentioned, we are working with King County and USGS on a model. So I put a star next to that because that's one that's already underway. We also want to look into partnering with the Corps on a flood protection study, similar to what the Port and City of San Francisco did under the CAP 205 and 103 programs. Those are federal risk reduction programs related to flooding. And there's a lot of funding available through those programs if you can get into one of them. We also talked about hazard mitigation and response planning. There's a lot happening in the city and at the county and at the port in terms of hazard mitigation planning, but a lot of times that is really just narrowly focused on emergency management departments and doesn't necessarily integrate well with planning. And we thought that there was an opportunity there to really expand that participation. Next slide. We wanted to look at options for joint ownership, so potentially pursuing that formal agreement model. A joint adaptation framework is also underway now. We've got a new scope of work for 2026 that includes that. Also looking at synergies on the Duwamish River with projects that are underway. We might be able to look at like a demonstration project that really builds on that co-benefit model and combining funding streams for habitat and for remediation and other different types of priorities to combine into one site. And then we also wanted to look at codes and standards to think about how for large public infrastructure, there might be a way to implement more alternative or phased compliance models that would allow us to, as public infrastructure owners and operators, continue our operations while sort of incrementally adapting through that adaptation pathways model. So these are the recommendations, a handful of the recommendations that came out of the report. Next slide, please. So we have, that was a weird transition. Sorry about that. We do have funding for 2026 to continue our work, and we want to really narrowly focus on just a handful of those recommendations. And these are kind of our top priorities for 2026. We do want to work on that joint adaptation framework, and that's going to be kind of a meta-analysis, pulling together existing plans and identifying areas that they overlap and identifying strategies that we could implement together and what the timelines might look like on that. We want to pull together our leadership from the various organizations and hold a workshop on further developing the joint adaptation framework, and also just really promoting adaptation in addition to climate mitigation as a priority. I think that a lot of our organizations have historically really focused on climate mitigation, and we're really wanting to promote adaptation as well. And that leads into the third priority, which is like creating these talking points around really promoting adaptation, especially in transportation planning. We really see mitigation as a primary focus in transportation planning in this region, which is super important. And like we all are very much behind that, but also just really want to make sure that adaptation doesn't get missed. And of course, we have a couple of partners, including Seattle Department of Transportation, that we really want to like re-engage with and make sure that they're really thinking about this adaptation approach too. So you can go to the next slide which is just resources and my contact information. So this website is kind of the parent site to where the AdaptSea website will be. So if you go there in the next couple of weeks, you'll be able to see a link to the AdaptSea website. And this is my contact info. So I would be happy to answer any questions or just open for discussion.
Thank you so much for this presentation.